Hello and welcome to the Conversational AI podcast. Today I'm joined by Paul Walker. Paul, you are most welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Paul, you are the Global Solutions Director for iManage. Can you just give us a background on you first of all, and then how you got to iManage, and then we'll go into the company.
Sure. So I've been in the legal tech sector or the professional service sector for around about 25 years now. I know you wouldn't guess it to look at me. I come from a background of accounting and law firms. So I was around about 10 years in a Magic Circle firm. I was also a number of years in a PwC, so working on the client side. I come from a technical background, so I'm an engineer at heart. Some of my code I still believe exists out there somewhere in the world and is still serving some happy customers, I'm sure. But in the iManage world, my code, thankfully, doesn't exist. And none of the code that we use today is generated by me. So I work on the solution side of the business. So I look across our product portfolio, our platform, and I seek to find different use cases for that within our customer base and into new markets in particular as well, and address different challenges that our customers have and how we can use the product stack to address that.
Gotcha. Give us an overview of the typical client then. How are people using your services at the moment? Then we'll get into the AI bit.
Sure. So, iManage has a long history. We specialise in the knowledge worker industries. So the industries where really what they are doing is enshrined, their output is enshrined often in documents and intellectual output. They're not generally producing goods and services, although they are producing a service, I guess, ultimately. But often the output of that is enshrined in some form of content that they produce on behalf of clients. So we're very strong within the legal industries for obvious reasons, but also very strong in the accounting industries, also in the financial services industries. And really what iManage does is, we started 25 years ago, and we were kind of one of the first generation of organizations that sought to bring order to the chaos of unstructured data in the world. Organizations were getting themselves into a bit of a model. They suddenly started producing content, producing lots and lots of content. The way that we produce content changed and evolved over many, many years. It went from just producing documents to then producing documents and emails, and then we suddenly have things like Teams chats, etc. So the way we communicate, the way we produce content has evolved. And never more important has it been for the organization. It's been imperative for those organizations to not just capture that and store it and centralize it and then collaborate and have all the benefits of that. They increasingly want to put context around that. And we've always, we've had this realization in iManage that actually what we've done over 25 years is apply ever more context to data, to unstructured data. And you can apply context in a lot of different ways. And actually, as we look at AI today, it's the kind of latest generation and the best, most improved way of applying context to that unstructured data and understanding what it is. And context is really power. Context is security. Context is governance. Context is getting the answer quicker to the questions that you have, having that answer quickly and dynamically.
Would you give us a perspective on AI and how you and the organization is reacting to it? Because is it fair to say that was it OpenAI, ChatGPT that really moved things for your customers to really look at AI, or have you been thinking about it for the longest time? What's the background there?
So we've been thinking about it and we acquired a company back in 2018, a company called Raven, which was kind of a precursor to generative AI. They built natural language models to understand, again, unstructured data. So that was our first foray into what I guess you would call modern AI. You could also look at kind of early generations of indexers and search technologies, also forms of AI. I don't know if you'd call them forms, but this does seem like a natural progression in terms of being able to get answers again from content quicker, that context that I mentioned earlier. So when we acquired that business in 2018, that was, not as part of that business, we acquired a team of data scientists, AI engineers who understood really how to get into the data that we were holding in our customers' repositories. Our customers, we are custodians of the infrastructure. Our customers put data in that infrastructure. And really what that enabled us to do was to dig into the content to give them more understanding what's inside that content. So start answering questions for them that they've never been able to answer before. Now, the big challenge with technology at that point in time was it took a big investment for the customer to train the model. They had to
Right.
train the model with their data to get the benefits of it. And so some of the use cases were challenging because you had to come at it, give it a time. There was a lead time of, it could be up to a sort of 20, 30 days, depending on gathering data and then training these models. And then you could really get value out of it. But actually, it limited the use cases quite
Yeah.
dramatically.
Did you need a client that was really forward thinking?
Really
Really
forward
keen,
thinking.
if you like. Yeah.
And again, there was a big kind of outlay of expense to do that. You had to kind of forward bet that this was going to produce the output and the outcome that you wanted out the end of it. And it was hard to get ahead of that without the investment. What generative AI has given us is it's removed that lead time. We no longer have to train the engines in the same way. The customer, we provide the service and the capability now within the platform, and the customer simply turns it on and starts asking the questions. And it's the lead to getting the answer has dramatically, it's gone from 30 days across 100,000 documents to instantaneous.
Wow.
And that's dramatically, that's the big swing change, the big change that we see through generative AI, quicker to the answer.
A lot of companies I've spoken to have been absolutely delighted with the likes of ChatGPT because it made it easy to discuss AI in the boardroom. Because these standard execs had seen this, if you like. I say standard, but non-experienced AI people, right? Laypersons had played with the thing and gone, wow, and then they're able to do this this mind leap to go, well, look, if we can make a poem for my 7-year-old, right, or grandchildren, or whatever, it can probably do some stuff for our company. Did you see? Was it an explosion or was it a slow, drive from your customer base?
No, it was an explosion. It was literally overnight, within the space of a couple of months. As you say, every exec team I've come across in the last 2 years fully understands the capability. And in a good and a bad way, there's a fear there, a fear of losing out, the fear of, there's a bit of FOMO in terms of what are my competitors doing and are they getting ahead of me? So there is a bit of that. But also what many exec teams I think did and what they did right was they didn't just plow the money that needed to support this in terms of the businesses into the IT teams and go, right, go and buy some AI tools. They set aside separate budgets often for AI. They realized they need this capability. They ring fence those budgets separate from the IT budget so that enable them to quickly and easily invest in there and work out what are the use cases, what are the positives, what deliver the most value for our businesses and our usage of AI. So yes, we did see this dramatic, as you say, this understanding.
Yes.
Straight away, they could understand the art of the possible. And again, as you say, the ChatGPT, I think the greatest thing they did many great things in the last 2 years, but ultimately what they did is open up that service, make it free of charge to that tier. And that kind of unlocked this technology. It's suddenly unlocked. If they kept that private and behind some sort of, expensive subscription, I think we would be in a very different place today.
I love the fact that when I come onto the iManage website, I see document, email, security, governance, risk, the kind of stuff I'd be expecting to see, especially given some of the client profiles. But then I see the iManage AI services. There's quite a lot of detail there. Would you say a little bit about that, Paul? How did you develop it? How are you reacting it? And what are clients saying about it?
Yeah, so I think we spent, again, we have that kind of deep historical domain knowledge. So we've actually learned from that experience, both the good and the bad, what works and what doesn't. And again, as I said earlier, the speed to which we can react has dramatically increased, and that's what's important here as well. But ultimately, the way that we are viewing the platform and what we deliver as a service is, ultimately we sit on data. It's not our data. We can't look at that data. It's secure, sensitive data that our customers put into our cloud platform and then manage in that right. And we don't have a right to see any of that data. But ultimately, we also know that one of the biggest values to our customer is being able to leverage that data. They live within the data industries where knowledge is enshrined in these materials. Yes. And if they can move the needle from reactive to proactive, so being able to kind of get ahead of things and see that things are changing, say a regulation somewhere is changing, and be able to look across their data dynamically and answer those questions without having these big cumbersome processes to go back and sift through, etc. That's huge value to them. So what we have been developing is not one app, it's not one capability, it's not one feature set that's just built into one of our apps. It's a set of core services that are built into the data of the platform. So you put content into the platform, and there is AI if you opt in, and this is an opt-in service because not all customers want AI running on their data. If you opt into those services, AI starts doing things with that data. And those things that it will do and do today will change over time. So we're not wedded to one feature set. So we do things like dot classification. Tell us what this content is. It's a seemingly simple problem, but it's a problem that has eluded any tech company, especially when we look at private unstructured data.
Right.
Where the person who authored that piece of content, that document or that email, has no interest in anyone being able to find that in the future. They don't.
It's not. Not for front mind. Right.
Yeah, you want to write. You put down your thoughts. You save it, and then you maybe share it, and then you're done.
Right.
Move on to the next task. And if you look at how Google works or has worked for 20, 30 years, around the SEO, search engine optimization industry, that's because people have a vested interest in their content being found. They invest heavily into the tunes of billions to have their content found or discovered by Google because they want to get to the top of the search rankings.
Yeah.
Those rules don't exist within the enterprise. Often it's the opposite rule where security is actually masking and hiding content.
Yes.
So how do we take AI, how do we apply it to that content, make it smarter, provide context around it, tell you what's going on in there, and then enable you very quickly to ask questions of that content. So tell me all the policies where the employee has to declare to me their social media interests, for example, and be able to scan across many, many tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands items of content and get that answer really, really quickly to those questions. And we never know what the question's going to be.
Just to make things a little bit very exciting. Okay, I hear you, Paul. I think it's interesting that you're using the language you're using to describe there is basically you're talking about natural language querying. Could you say a little bit about that and how you're approaching that? Because obviously we're conversational AI. We're really excited about that here in this particular podcast. But you're using a conversational approach here.
Yeah, and again, I've worked around search and search technologies for 2 decades, and so I've seen the evolution of these. And still, the biggest challenge of search before we got to this generation of tech was the user had to know something about the words that might be found inside the piece of content to be able to identify and find that content. And that was always a challenge. What word? I need to know what word Ewan might have used to describe this podcast to be able to then find it.
Yes.
For example, and then we were often wrong. There was all sorts of potential issues in there. There's issues around security, governance, etc. Did Ewan secure it away to someone and not me, and therefore I can't find it? So you see this kind of very painful process to find an answer to a question. And sometimes these questions are seemingly obvious questions. And see the journeys that sometimes users would have to sift through. And really what most vendors did for a period of years was try to improve the UX because that was a way of sifting through this data very quickly to get to the end result. And you still need that UX. It's still really important and you still need those capabilities. But what AI gives us is the ability to ask a question for the engine to be able to infer the relationships.
Yes.
Hey, I know Paul, I know Ewan. I know when Paul's asking this question, I think there's a relationship to what Ewan called it. And it infers that relationship using the neural networks that it's developed. And it then is able to deliver a result. One other one that I'm absolutely fascinated on, Ewan, I think it absolutely blows my mind, is also language independence.
Oh, yes.
The fact that you could be speaking in French and you could have written the document in French and I'm asking the question in English. Now I would have to know the French equivalent to get the answer previously. But now the engine can do the translation. It's built the network. It knows when I'm asking this question in English what the French equivalent is and it's able to identify that. I think that's an absolutely groundbreaking.
I might venture, Paul, that you and I are perhaps of a generation whereby, I am deeply impressed by this. My 14-year-old doesn't see it, right? But I'm still impressed that when I say credit card numbers or something to a system and it gets it accurate, because I remember it being terrible. Let alone trying to just get English. No, let's not go to French. But
Yeah,
I find it almost magical
it is.
at the moment. But how have you found this in your role? Because this is really exciting, but I would imagine the pressures on you are quite dramatic because this thing's changing, right? Across a couple of years.
Yeah, no, I'm not quite at the end of my career, but I can see it somewhere down the road. And I never thought, if I'm honest, such new exciting tech would appear on the landscape. I didn't foresee it. I've tracked AI pretty closely, but I didn't see it would make that quick a jump that quickly. And it has changed the landscape, right? It's changed the way that we learn. It's changed our ability to learn. I think we all have those nascent fears about, are we kind of unlearning in a sense?
Right.
Is the engine just telling us what we think that we need
Yes.
to know, and therefore are we kind of unlearning? So there is a nascent fear, and I think that is, it's right to be cautious on these and be careful about those. But yeah, I think it's just it's an amazing time to kind of be. I feel very privileged to be in this space at this point in time, because especially when I look at things like the legal industry, the accounting industry, the big struggle for those industries to be seen as tech and
Right.
technology led has been the nature of the data that they deal with. They don't deal with like structured data like banks and stuff, where it was very
Transactions and so
simple.
on, right? Yeah.
Exactly. There was the innovation in the structured data was possible. In the unstructured data world, it was always a challenge, because understanding what was inside this English language, or this language that we embed in a document, was always a challenge.
I was in a room full of bankers recently, junior bankers, I should say, and I just asked the question, I say, how many of you use AI at work? And this was in the Middle East, where there wasn't much cloud. So they've had a problem. It's a challenge adopting AI at the moment in that region, in some areas of the Middle East. And I said, how many of you use it at work? No hands. Next to no. I think one person, but it's an international company they worked at. So of a couple hundred people, 0 hands. I said, how many of you use AI, ChatGPT, etc. personally? 100% hands. 100% hands. I was wondering, but that's if you like, the youngsters. And now I don't. I think it's wrong to be separated between young and old. He says with grey hair, right? Okay. But what challenges do you see with your clients reacting to these capabilities?
Yeah, that's an interesting. I think. There's a few thoughts that come to my mind, but there's this constant phrase or word that comes into my mind is curious. It's
Right.
People's success of using AI as it stands today stems out of curiosity. Often it's when you're presented with a ChatGPT prompt as an example, if you are curious, you'll be amazed at what you can get out of it. The different types of prompts, and you're not just saying summarize this or give me a recipe for my dinner tonight. What you can actually ask it to do in terms of real work is incredible in terms of the capabilities. And I think that curiosity, I think sometimes, and again, I don't, like yourself, I don't wish to bring age into this, but sometimes I think it's more senior in terms of role. And sometimes that seniority of role means that they don't get time necessarily in their work lives to play around with tech and see that. I think sometimes that seniority and role means they don't get to see the effects of this, the impact of what they can and can't do.
Now, when you're looking at the iManage offering, how are you surfacing this kind of AI capability, and what's that very high level business model? How are you doing that?
So I think one thing that we noted very quickly was the kind of, again, a lot of our customer base are by almost definition very incredibly busy people. These aren't people who typically work a 35-hour week. It's well written across most of the industries we serve in terms of the work hours that they put in. And so squeezing a new piece of tech, changing a button on the screen, moving things around the screen are always a no-no, because you can massively impact and alienate
that process. Yeah,
exactly. And so when we introduced one particular capability, which is effectively a prompt,
Right.
very much like a ChatGPT prompt, but ultimately enables you to have a dialogue with your data, ask questions of it using natural language. What we saw was this kind of inertia. People didn't know the art of the possible, therefore didn't know what to do. And I think when you look at the co-pilots of the world, I think that's similarly been impacted by the same. It's great capability, it's great possibilities, but a text box and then having to think of something to say is actually harder than just clicking a button that I know I can do in 15 seconds, and I've done it 4,000 times before.
Yes.
And I almost see this as, analogous to like the early operating systems, like MS-DOS or something. When it first came
Those were the days, Paul. Yeah.
Those were the days. Now we definitely are aging it as well. But ultimately, MS-DOS, those kind of operating systems, when it came to market, they had no apps.
Yes.
They had no capability.
Prompt. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But the possibilities were incredible, right? The possibilities of what you could build on top of it were immense. But it took someone or some people to be very curious, to be very minded in that way, to kind of develop and build applications. And then look at where we are today, where you've got your iPhone and your iPad, where who knows really what the OS is often underneath that. All you ever consume is apps. And I think that's where AI is going to go ultimately. I think we will probably move away from the prompt. I think the prompt has some value, so I don't think it will disappear. But I think what we'll see is more and more apps that leverage AI as part of their workflows, and therefore the user doesn't need to think about AI. It's purely part of a workflow. It's part of a process. They're clicking buttons, and it's transitioning through it, but it's using AI as part of that.
Would there be a time, and I'm wondering if where I would essentially in the future perhaps just have the iManage agent, a little bit like Jarvis, like a from Iron Man, where I can essentially just say, hey guy, bring up the last contract. Yeah, no, okay, to change that, search for this, bring me that. Is that a future thing, or is this something you can answer, Paul, or is that a little bit too crazy?
No, I think it's here and now, right? I think the concept of that kind of, I guess, assistant. And again, we have to be very careful of terminology here, and we do get very cautious around terminology because often assistants get confused with replacing me rather than enhancing me. Again, if you take that Iron Man example, the assistant makes him smarter. It takes away some of the laborious tasks that he can actually think and do great things. And I think that's where I like to see AI as being kind of an extension of my superpower, as opposed to it being me and the superpower.
Yes.
And I think that's where we'll evolve. Now, in terms of kind of the interaction, in terms of, are we speaking to it? Are we thinking to it? Are we moving our hands around the air? We've seen all those in various movies. I think sometimes at the moment, sadly or wrongly or rightly, it's practical. I think it's all possible. I think we could talk to AI today and ask it to do things on the machine and do, create me a document. In that document, draft me a note to party X around policy Y. That's possible today. But I think our working spaces, the way that we work, aren't particularly well set up for it. Okay, if I'm working at home in a private space, then maybe I can have a language, a voice-assisted service. But if I'm anywhere near an office, in a co-working space or anything like that, or in a public area, all of a sudden those tools become useless. And again, even with the kind of goggles, you see the people with the Meta goggles and stuff, and the amount of social media videos around people walking down the street with. So I think the tech might catch up. It might involve implants. I'm sure that's where Elon's going with some of this.
Indeed.
I don't think we're there yet in terms of how we can interact with it. I do believe that the keyboard has possibly got a limited shelf life.
That's a very, very good description. I like that, Paul. Very good. Okay, Paul, could you give us an example of someone that you think is doing great work in and around conversational AI? Somebody else.
I mean, I think while I think Copilot and Microsoft have got challenges in terms of adoption and use cases, I do think they have laid the road for AI in the enterprise. And I think they've helped educate the market in terms of the prompt and the art of the possible. I'm not saying they're there yet. They've got challenges. I definitely agree. They've got road to go. But I think someone like Microsoft getting into that space, pushing it into the mainstream applications that
Embracing and encouraging.
70% of the world use day in, day out, I think has been good. And Microsoft is a large enterprise. They don't need me to sit here and tell them that they've done good. I do think OpenAI again is way at the forefront. I don't think I couldn't deny that they're at the forefront and the leading edge of this. I also kind of want to call out some of the open source vendors that are in the open source space. We play around and we experiment with some open source tech. Olama, which is a hosting framework for third-party open source LLMs. It hooks into Hugging Face, where all the open source LLMs are being hosted, and enables you to kind of trial those and play those and experience those. And then there's another open source community on top of that called the Open Web UI. And they've built a ChatGPT-like interface that sits on top of Olama, so you can bring in your own LLMs. And I think that I 100% agree with the open source spirit of that. Will it ever be as good as ChatGPT? Question, I don't know. Will it ever be as good as the paid, services? Who knows? I think so over time. I do appreciate that some of the models that appear in that open source market, they are sometimes tuned for niche verticals and niche use cases, and some of those niche use cases are really important. And I think it's important to have that community, because I think it does feed the wider community. So I want to call out those kind of open source communities, because I think they're doing great work, and I think they should continue. We need those in the world.
Agreed, Paul. For those who'd like to find out more about iManage and who'd like to connect with you, Paul, what's the best way?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the best way. Paul Walker, Global Solutions Director, iManage, on LinkedIn. Happy to, if anyone wants to post a quick message to me. And if you fail to find me on LinkedIn, obviously iManage.com, there is a contact us kind of form as a second full stop.
Nice one. Paul, can I say thank you so much for taking the time today?
Thank you, Ewan. It's been an absolute pleasure.